Think you need a smart mattress, blackout curtains, and a $400 gadget to sleep well? Medieval monks would laugh, quietly of course, and then sleep better than you ever have. Long before melatonin gummies and wellness trends, these silent brothers cracked the code to perfect rest. Stone cells, biphasic rhythms, and a strict daily routine that made insomnia almost impossible. What they practiced in candlelight, modern science is just now rediscovering. But here's the twist. None of it was about comfort. Ready to find out how monks outslept the entire modern world? Stick around. One secret will change the way you look at 3 a.m. forever. Imagine getting the best sleep of your life, every single night. No sirens, no buzzing phones, no neighbors dragging furniture at 2 a.m., just pure, uninterrupted, soul-healing rest. Sounds like a wellness influencer's fantasy, right? Well, it was actually the lived reality for medieval monks. While we're guzzling melatonin and doom-scrolling until 1 a.m., these guys cracked the sleep code nearly 1,000 years ago, without a single white noise machine in sight. Let's rewind to a Benedictine monastery in 12th century France. The air is cool and still. Stone walls block out the wind and muffle any outside sound. Inside their austere cells, monks are asleep on straw-filled mattresses, wrapped in woolen habits, breathing in the faint scent of beeswax from a distant candle. Their rest isn't just deep, it's strategic. These monks followed a biphasic sleep schedule, meaning they slept in 2 chunks, once in the evening and once again after midnight prayers. It might sound disruptive, but science says otherwise. Modern chronobiologists have found that biphasic sleep, 2 consolidated sleep periods with a brief wake phase in between, might actually be more in tune with our natural circadian rhythms than the single 8-hour block we idolize today. In fact, before electric lighting, many medieval people across Europe reported a first sleep and a second sleep, using the in-between phase for quiet reflection, prayer, or even chatting with bedmates. But monks didn't just stumble into this rhythm, they optimized it. Unlike the chaos of modern life, monasteries were built around routines. The rule of Saint Benedict, the gold standard of monastic life, dictated everything from meals to silence. Sleep was sacred, but not indulgent. Monks usually got about 6 to 8 hours a night, split by nocturnal prayer known as vigils or matins. They'd retire shortly after sunset and rise again a few hours before dawn. But here's the twist. Because their sleep was so disciplined, consistent, and in line with natural light cycles, they got better rest in half the time than most of us do today. Compare that to our modern nightmare. We're bombarded with artificial light, caffeine, shift work, and screen time. Even when we try to sleep, our brains are on high alert. Blue light suppresses melatonin, and social media hijacks our prefrontal cortex. No wonder nearly 1 in 3 adults report insomnia symptoms. Meanwhile, medieval monks, without knowing a single neurotransmitter, engineered the ultimate sleep lab. And it wasn't just about the schedule. The sleep environment mattered. Monastic cells, typically no more than a few square meters, were minimalist sanctuaries. A single window, if any, kept light pollution non-existent. Thick stone walls buffered sound. There were no personal belongings, no pets, no food, and certainly no distractions. Beds were simple, wooden frames or pallets topped with straw mattresses. Pillows were rare. Some monks even slept sitting up to avoid overindulgence. This wasn't suffering, it was intention. Silence was another key ingredient. The so-called grand silence began after Compline, the final prayer before bedtime, and lasted until morning. During this period, no one spoke unless absolutely necessary. No whispered gossip, no clinking mugs, no late-night arguments, just the hum of stillness. It turns out silence is more than golden. It's essential for deep sleep. Recent studies show that even low-level noise can fragment sleep architecture and reduce REM cycles. Monks didn't need studies. They lived the results. Temperature control was built right into the architecture. Thick stone kept rooms cool in the summer and insulated in winter. Monks wore layers and used heavy woolen blankets, which naturally regulate body temperature. Compare that to your average modern apartment, too hot in July, too cold in January, with HVAC systems cycling all night. No wonder we toss and turn. And here's something wild. Monks weren't lazy. They worked hard, often physically exhausting tasks like gardening, copying manuscripts, or brewing ale. Physical fatigue helped them fall asleep fast and stay asleep. But their labor wasn't stressful in the modern sense. There were no deadlines, No bosses breathing down their necks, no existential dread from checking the news. The combination of physical exertion and spiritual peace? A sleep doctor's dream. It wasn't all perfect, of course. Some monks suffered from cold, lice, or health issues. But overall, their sleep hygiene put ours to shame. Even their midnight wake-ups had purpose. Monks would gather for vigils, chant psalms in candlelit chapels, then return to bed spiritually grounded and hormonally primed for round 2 of sleep. That's right, spiritual activity can enhance melatonin release and lower cortisol. Science is just now catching up. Imagine waking up not to a blaring alarm but to a natural dawn, filtered through medieval glass. No email inbox, no traffic jam. Just morning prayers and maybe a bit of bread. For monks, sleep wasn't a luxury. It was a form of devotion. Their bodies rested, their minds cleared, and their spirits recharged. And without even knowing it, they perfected a nightly ritual that today's wellness industry would kill to patent. Want a modern analogy? Picture someone living in a high-end sleep retreat in the Alps, natural light only, strict digital detox, personalized circadian rhythm management, zero ambient noise, and structured meditation. Now imagine doing that every day for decades. That's what monks had. But without the $3,000 price tag. Their approach wasn't just about rest. It was a rejection of chaos. Sleep was one pillar in a life built around stability, community, and contemplation. It's no coincidence that monasteries also had some of the best medical care, longest life expectancy, and highest literacy rates in the medieval world. They weren't just healthier, they were saner. So the next time you're doom scrolling at 2 a.m. under a blue LED lamp with your brain screaming for dopamine, remember? A medieval monk in a cold stone cell with no mattress topper and zero Netflix was probably sleeping better than you, and he was doing it on purpose. It might seem ironic that a lifestyle centered on denial and discipline offered some of the best sleep in human history, but that was precisely the point. For monks, sleep wasn't an escape from stress. It was a part of their divine rhythm. Every hour of the day was accounted for. Every bell ring signaled a transition, and that order gave the mind peace. That predictability is something modern life actively robs from us. Think about it. How many times has your sleep been derailed by a late-night email, a last-minute deadline, or just the buzzing anxiety of an unpredictable schedule? In medieval monasteries, unpredictability was virtually non-existent. The rule of St. Benedict laid down a fixed timetable for every day: prayer, work, meals, silence, and rest. This repetitive structure conditioned the body and mind to expect and embrace each phase, including sleep. In fact, recent neuroscience backs this up. The more regular your sleep schedule, the stronger your circadian rhythm becomes. The stronger your rhythm, the easier it is to fall asleep and stay asleep. Monks didn't need circadian apps. They just lived their timetable, rain or shine. Let's dig deeper into the sleeping quarters. You might expect monks to have communal dormitories filled with snoring brethren, but that's only partly true. Early monastic houses did favor shared dormitories, especially in places like Cluny or Citeaux. But over time, especially by the High Middle Ages, private cells became more common in stricter orders like the Carthusians. These weren't luxury suites, just bare cold stone rooms, often no more than 6 feet wide. But solitude made a difference. No noise, no interruption, total sensory minimalism. Monks essentially invented the sleep cave modern sleep gurus rave about. And the simplicity of their bedding wasn't a punishment. It was smart. Modern research shows that too soft mattresses can actually hinder spinal alignment and lead to poor quality sleep. Monks slept on wooden planks, straw mattresses, or wool-stuffed sacks, firm but breathable. No memory foam, no synthetic materials. Just natural, ergonomic surfaces that promoted deeper, less restless sleep. Even their wool blankets were breathable and moisture-wicking, ideal for regulating body temperature in unheated stone chambers. But monks didn't just rely on external conditions, they prepared internally as well. Pre-sleep rituals were embedded into the monastic day. Compline, the last prayer service before bed, served as a communal, unwinding moment. It included hymns, psalms, and a final blessing. The mood was subdued, candlelit, and reflective. Today, we might call this sleep hygiene. They called it devotion. Either way, it worked. Preparing the mind for sleep is just as critical as preparing the body, and monks had this mastered centuries before bedtime meditations were trending on apps. There's also the matter of fasting. Unlike modern diets that involve late-night snacking or indulgent dinners, monks often finish their final meal, usually just bread, beans, and some ale, well before sunset. This unintentional intermittent fasting meant they went to bed with fully digested stomachs. And guess what? Digestion affects sleep. Studies show that eating too close to bedtime increases nighttime wakefulness and disrupts REM cycles. Yet again, the monastic life got it right without even trying. One of the more fascinating elements of monastic sleep was how it blended communal and individual rhythms. While monks followed the same schedule, their sleep experiences were deeply personal. During the midnight vigils, some monks would stay awake in contemplation before returning to sleep. Others might lie down but not fall immediately asleep, choosing to mentally recite psalms or reflect on scripture. This quiet flexibility allowed each monk to align with his own sleep needs without abandoning the structure of the community. Compare that to modern sleep culture, where personalization is marketed as a luxury. Adjustable mattresses, custom temperature beds, weighted blankets, all aiming to mimic what monks already achieved through simplicity and routine. What costs us thousands in sleep tech came naturally to those living in spiritual poverty. Even their mental state supported better sleep. Monks practiced constant mindfulness long before the term existed. Their days were filled with purposeful silence, repetitive chants, and meditative reading. This constant inner calibration lowered stress and anxiety, two of the biggest modern sleep killers. Think about it. No bills to pay, no social media, no traffic, just labor, prayer, and community. That inner peace wasn't just good for the soul. It was a sedative. And let's not overlook the role of natural light. Monasteries were oriented to align with the sun. Early morning light streamed through east-facing chapels, reinforcing circadian cues. No fluorescent bulbs, no blinking electronics. Just the sky. Studies have shown that even 30 minutes of morning sunlight can significantly improve sleep quality by resetting the internal clock. Monks didn't need the studies. They lived outside the artificial clock entirely. When seasons changed, so did their schedules. Monastic rules allowed for slight adjustments in sleeping hours during winter months. More darkness meant more sleep, another win for circadian alignment. Today, we fight the seasons with artificial lighting and caffeine, but monks embraced the tilt of the earth as divine rhythm. Their bodies adapted with the sun, not against it. Even illness and aging were handled with care. Older monks or those who were sick were often granted extra rest or allowed to skip early prayers. This wasn't weakness, it was respect for the body's needs. Modern workplaces could learn a thing or two. In fact, monasteries often kept detailed records of sleep, rest, and health patterns, rudimentary sleep tracking long before Fitbits. All this contributed to a higher quality of life. Monks in well-run monasteries lived longer than most medieval people. Their lives weren't free of hardship, but they were buffered by a lifestyle that prioritized mental clarity, physical health, and yes, excellent sleep. The irony? The people who voluntarily gave up comfort ended up sleeping better than almost anyone in history. And what about dreams? Monks saw sleep not just as rest, but as a space for spiritual encounter. Dreams were considered moments of divine communication or moral reflection. They didn't scroll through TikTok before bed, they meditated on eternity. That kind of focus, whether you believe in its spiritual dimension or not, quiets the mind in a way that Netflix never could. So here we are centuries later, drowning in sleep aids, apps, blackout curtains, and bedtime podcasts, all trying to recreate a kind of peace that medieval monks found without trying. It wasn't magic, it was routine, simplicity, intention, and silence. In a world obsessed with productivity, they made rest a sacred duty. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson. We've spent billions trying to hack sleep, but monks simply respected it. They treated it as a gift, a responsibility, even a prayer. And in doing so, they slept better than we ever will, until we're willing to follow their example, not just with our bodies, but with our lives. What would it take for us to live that simply again? Or even just sleep that simply? Because while the modern world spirals in sleep deprivation, somewhere deep in a mountain abbey or a silent cloister, a monk is sleeping like a baby, on purpose and without apology. And that's not just historical trivia. That's a wake-up call. Here's the paradox. The same monks who mastered sleep also spent large portions of their lives trying to overcome the desires of the flesh, including comfort. Yet in seeking spiritual discipline, they inadvertently perfected one of the most essential human needs. This wasn't a case of indulgence leading to well-being, it was restraint shaping a healthier existence. But as monastic sleep routines continued to evolve across centuries and geographies, variations emerged that revealed just how adaptable and sophisticated this model really was. Different orders had different rules. While the Benedictines pioneered a structured but moderate approach, typically allowing 6 to 8 hours of broken sleep, other orders took more extreme paths. The Cistercians, for example, were known for their rigorous asceticism. Their dormitories were often unheated even in winter, and they slept fully clothed, ready to spring up for vigils in the middle of the night. Their beds were often little more than a wooden plank and a woolen blanket. While this might sound like a medieval sleep torture chamber, many monks reported no difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. In fact, modern sleep studies suggest that people who maintain consistent wake and sleep times, even if the sleep is shorter, report better sleep satisfaction than those who don't. Then there were the Carthusians, a truly radical case. Each monk lived in complete solitude within a private cell that functioned as a micro-monastery. This included a garden, a study, and a bed. Carthusians slept entirely alone, observed near-total silence, and received food through a small window to avoid contact. These men were not only the champions of solitude, they were the unwitting champions of sleep quality. No social interruptions, no late-night disturbances, no environmental chaos. This was monk mode on steroids. What modern minimalist influencers try to simulate with remote cabins and digital detox retreats, the Carthusians lived full-time. And yet, the brilliance wasn't in the discomfort. It was in how the discomfort was controlled, understood, and contextualized. Monks didn't fight their bodies, they guided them. Their relationship with sleep wasn't adversarial like ours often is, it was cooperative. They accepted tiredness as a cue, not a weakness. When they woke in the night for prayers, they didn't groan or reach for caffeine. They embraced the interruption as holy. Today we're told to panic if we wake at 3 a.m. Monks were told to listen. This reframing of sleep, from a biological function to a sacred rhythm, shifted everything. And it wasn't just philosophical, it created real physiological effects. Let's talk about cortisol. This stress hormone is one of the major enemies of good sleep. High cortisol at night can prevent sleep onset, reduce deep sleep, and shorten REM cycles. But studies of contemplative practices, like chanting, meditation, and silence, show they can significantly reduce cortisol levels. Monks lived in a constant state of low cortisol alertness. Their stress response was regulated not by medication, but by spiritual practice. And we can't forget melatonin. This natural hormone controls sleep timing and is triggered by darkness and suppressed by light. Medieval monasteries had minimal artificial lighting, maybe a candle or oil lamp at most. When the sun went down, the light spectrum shifted naturally. No blue light, no flickering LEDs, no 60-inch televisions blasting into the retina. The result? Their melatonin production was unimpeded. Compare that to today, where over 90% of adults use screens before bed, delaying melatonin release by hours. Again, monks weren't biohacking. They were just living naturally. Even noise exposure was intelligently managed. Most monasteries were built in remote areas, hillsides, valleys, forest clearings. Nature's ambient sounds, wind, water, animals, replaced the artificial hum of machines and traffic. Acoustic research confirms that natural sounds can enhance sleep depth and improve the transition into REM sleep. A monk falling asleep to rustling leaves and distant owl calls wasn't just romantic, it was optimal. And then there's posture. Believe it or not, monks had some of the best spinal alignment possible without a chiropractor in sight. Their firm sleeping surfaces, combined with daily labor and upright posture during prayer and work, kept their backs strong. Today, we suffer from tech neck and lumbar collapse from sitting all day. The physical demands of monastic life acted like a daily workout for posture, making their sleep more restorative. Good posture doesn't just help during the day, it influences how your body relaxes at night. Let's add one more layer: community. While many monks slept alone or in silence, they were never truly isolated. The rhythms of the monastery ensured regular connection through shared prayers, meals, and work. This balance of solitude and connection fostered psychological safety. Studies show that feeling socially secure can dramatically reduce nighttime anxiety. While modern people are plagued by loneliness that spikes right before bed, monks felt anchored, even in solitude. And despite their tight routines, monks were not robots. They got tired. They got sick. They aged. But the monastery adapted. Older monks were given more rest. Novices were gradually eased into the full schedule. Even discipline had compassion. Contrast that with modern hustle culture, where sleep is often sacrificed for productivity. Monastic culture saw sleep not as a threat to work, but as a prerequisite for meaningful labor. We should also talk about seasonal affective disorder, SAID, something many people suffer from in winter months due to reduced sunlight. Interestingly, monks also faced long, dark winters, especially in Northern Europe. But their days remained structured, with built-in exposure to daylight during early morning and afternoon work periods. And the spiritual framing of darkness, not as something to fear, but to reflect in, offered emotional insulation. The psychological impact of winter was mitigated by a deeply embedded sense of purpose and belonging. So where does that leave us? We're in a world filled with luxury mattresses, adaptive lighting, and sleep-focused tech. Yet sleep disorders are more rampant than ever. Our solutions often treat symptoms, pills, machines, gadgets, without addressing the underlying chaos of our environment and minds. Monks didn't cure insomnia. They prevented it by never letting the conditions for it develop. They practiced what modern science is just now rediscovering, that consistent routines, reduced stimulation, and inner stillness are not optional for good sleep. They're foundational. And those aren't things you can buy on Amazon. The deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. Monastic sleep wasn't perfect because it was harsh. It was perfect because it was harmonized. Every element, from architecture to prayer to silence, worked in tandem to support human biology and elevate spiritual focus. That's not just historically interesting. It's instructive. Because while we're stuck in a cycle of chasing sleep and cursing wakefulness, monks lived in a loop of rest and reverence. They didn't fear the night. They entered it with calm. And when the dawn came, they rose. Not groggy, not rushed, but ready. We may not all become monks, but maybe we can steal a few of their secrets. Or better yet, adopt their wisdom. Because somewhere in a forgotten cloister, lit only by stars and the flicker of a candle, a monk lies down tonight. No sleep mask, no sleep app, just rhythm and rest and a soul at peace. So let's push this idea further. Imagine you're a layperson in the 13th century, maybe a blacksmith, a weaver, or a peasant farmer. You don't live in a monastery, but you've heard the bells ringing out from the abbey on the hill. You've seen the monks pass by in silence, faces serene, backs unbent. And you've probably wondered what goes on behind those stone walls. You've likely never seen the inside of a monastic dormitory, but the monks' calm presence suggests they live very differently. And that difference, it radiates outward. Because here's the thing. Monastic sleep habits didn't just benefit the monks themselves, they created a ripple effect. The rhythms of the monastery became the unofficial clock for entire communities. When the monastery bell rang for matins in the middle of the night or lauds before sunrise, it reminded even secular villagers of the time. The structure imposed by the monastery offered stability in a world that otherwise had very little. In a sense, monks were the sleep standard setters for medieval society, and their architectural innovations didn't stay behind cloistered walls. Monasteries influenced how churches and even homes were designed. Thick walls for insulation and noise control, stone for temperature regulation, small windows to block light. Features we now tout in eco-friendly building had been mastered for centuries by monastic builders trying to help their brothers get a decent night's rest. Some monasteries even began to study sleep, not in the clinical sense we do now, but through careful observation. Chroniclers noted when monks struggled to stay awake during prayers or when certain routines led to restlessness. Adjustments followed. In some cases, matins were shifted slightly earlier or later, depending on the season or the perceived health of the community. What we'd now call sleep optimization was just good stewardship. Let's also look at gender. While male monasticism often grabs the spotlight, medieval nuns followed many of the same rhythms, and sometimes refined them further. Women's communities like those led by Hildegard of Bingen practiced equally rigorous schedules but with adaptations for age and health that were more nuanced. Their environments were equally conducive to sleep, serene, ordered, and cloistered from worldly chaos. Hildegard herself wrote about the value of sleep and the rhythms of the body in her medical texts. She believed spiritual and physical rest were intertwined, and her holistic approach was centuries ahead of its time. Now imagine this lifestyle persisting for hundreds of years. Through wars, plagues, famines, and upheavals, monasteries remained islands of stability. And a big part of that stability was sleep. During the chaos of the Black Death, monastic communities offered not only medical care, but spiritual and psychological support, fueled by the resilience of their deeply embedded rhythms. Even when monks died in large numbers, their way of life endured. Why? Because it worked. Because it was sustainable. Because sleep was part of the system, not an afterthought. By the late Middle Ages, some monastic practices even seeped into urban life. Wealthier households began to emulate aspects of monastic sleep: biphasic patterns, earlier bedtimes, and quiet morning reflection. In some cities, public clocks echoed the canonical hours. The line between religious time and civic time blurred. Monks had unintentionally redefined what time meant, and with it, redefined how people thought about rest. Of course, it wasn't all utopia. As monastic communities grew wealthier and more politically entangled, some began to drift from their austere origins. Lavish abbeys emerged with feather beds and comfort luxuries. Critics like the reform-minded Cistercians, or later the Protestant reformers, decried the decadence creeping in. But the core principles remained stubbornly influential. Even the most comfort-loving abbot still rang the bell for Compline and kept some form of structured rest. And this structure wasn't just religious dogma. It was quietly revolutionary. In an age without anesthesia, without reliable medicine, without sanitation, good sleep was a lifesaver. Monks may not have had the terminology, but they knew that a rested brother was a healthier, kinder, more spiritually aware one. Sleep wasn't selfish. It was preparation for prayer, for work, for death. We've got data now to back up what they intuited. Sleep boosts immune function, stabilizes mood, improves cognition, and lengthens lifespan. 1,000 years ago, monks didn't need peer-reviewed studies to understand that. They had centuries of evidence walking the cloisters. Calm, alert, purposeful men who aged gracefully and died well. That wasn't an accident. That was sleep, built into a life that honored it. And yet, despite its success, this monastic model has almost entirely vanished from modern culture. Today's sleep advice is fragmented, commercialized, and often contradictory. We try to piece together healthy routines from fitness trackers, influencer hacks, and endless articles. But the truth is, monks had the answer all along. Build your life around rhythms, not the other way around. Imagine what our society could look like if we structured our lives to support rest instead of chasing productivity. If we treated sleep like monks did, as sacred, disciplined, and communal. What if silence wasn't awkward but respected? What if bedtime wasn't a battleground but a blessing? We've inherited so much from the medieval world: universities, hospitals, legal systems, but perhaps its most forgotten gift is its approach to sleep. The monks didn't just teach theology or copy texts, they modeled how to live and how to rest. And even as modern medicine advances and neuroscience peels back the layers of sleep's mysteries, we're still just confirming what monks knew in their bones: that good sleep doesn't come from indulgence, it comes from intention. So the next time you stare at your ceiling at 3 a.m., wired and weary, think of those stone cells on a foggy hilltop. Think of the quiet breath of men who rose with purpose, labored in peace, and laid down in silence. They weren't chasing wellness, they were embodying it. And in that ancient stillness, perhaps we can rediscover what we've lost: not just better sleep, but a better way of living. In the shadow of every monastery bell and beneath the weight of every woolen blanket, monks weren't just sleeping. They were resetting their entire existence. Their nightly rituals, so simple on the surface, were part of something far deeper: the cultivation of stability in an unpredictable world. And in that pursuit, they discovered a secret we're still fumbling to recover today. Monastic sleep wasn't about comfort or luxury, it was about alignment, with nature, with community, and with the inner self. But let's fast forward. By the 15th century, things were changing. Europe was waking up to a new rhythm. Towns were growing. Trade was booming. The printing press had arrived, and with it came clocks. Real clocks. Suddenly, the sun was no longer the only timekeeper. Mechanical time took over where natural time once ruled. It was the beginning of what sleep historians now call clock time tyranny, and monastic sleep, once the gold standard, began to seem old-fashioned. Still, monasteries clung to their bells and cycles. In a world rushing toward modernity, monks remained anchored in ancient rhythms. But the outside world wasn't so lucky. Cities lit up with oil lamps, then gaslight, then electricity. Workdays stretched, nights shrank. The biphasic sleep model that had served medieval people for centuries began to crumble. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the idea of waking in the middle of the night for reflection or prayer seemed strange. Productivity had become the new religion, and sleep was its first casualty. And yet a few cracks remained, evidence that the monastic model never fully disappeared. Rural communities, especially in parts of Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean, continued patterns of biphasic or segmented sleep well into the 20th century. Older generations remembered the first sleep and the quiet wakefulness that followed. In some regions, this liminal phase was still referred to by name, passed down like a family heirloom. It wasn't entirely gone. It was just buried under the noise of progress. Then came the 21st century, and with it, a sleep crisis unlike anything before. Nearly 40% of adults in the developed world report chronic sleep issues. Insomnia, sleep apnea, delayed sleep phase disorder, you name it. And as medicine scrambles to fix what industrial society broke, researchers have turned their gaze backward, way back, to a time when people didn't need sleep coaches or blackout curtains to rest. And they've started asking, what did medieval monks know that we forgot? The answer, it turns out, is everything. Because modern sleep science is now confirming what monks lived intuitively. Sleep is not just about quantity. It's about timing, environment, and mental state. You can't hack your way to better sleep if your life is built on noise and chaos, but you can rebuild your life around rhythms that support it. That's what monks did, and that's the radical invitation of their legacy. But let's get specific. What if we actually borrowed their habits? Let's say you go to bed at the same time every night, not just on work days, but every day. That's Rule of St. Benedict 101. Your body begins to expect it. Your sleep latency drops. You fall asleep faster. Next, you cut off all screens and artificial lights an hour before bed. You light a candle, read a physical book, maybe recite a calming passage or prayer. No scrolling, no email. Your melatonin isn't just protected, it's amplified. You're in monastic territory now. Then your bedroom. No distractions, no clutter, no gadgets blinking at you. Just a cool, dark, quiet space with natural fabrics. Maybe even a firmer mattress. Your sleep efficiency spikes. Your body relaxes before your mind even catches up. Now let's bring in the mental part. You practice silence. Maybe it's 10 minutes of stillness after Compline-style reflection. You journal. You breathe. You align your mind with your body. The monks did this every night. Neuroscience now calls it mindfulness, but the effect is the same. Lower cortisol, deeper sleep. And here's where it gets really wild. What if you woke up in the middle of the night and didn't panic? Instead, you accepted it. Maybe you lit a candle and reflected. Maybe you wrote, or meditated, or just sat in peace. No tossing, no anxiety, just a pause. That's what monks did during their segmented sleep. It wasn't a disruption. It was an opportunity. And after an hour or so, you'd return to bed and sleep again. Not because you forced it, but because your body wanted it. Now let's zoom out. You've been doing this for weeks. Your sleep is deeper. You're waking with the sun, not groggy, but grounded. You're not dependent on apps, pills, or trackers. You've reclaimed something ancient. And you realize it wasn't about being medieval. It was about being human. Because that's the real revelation. The monastic model didn't work because monks were superhuman. It worked because it was human scale. They lived at the pace our bodies are built for, in tune with the sun, the seasons, and their inner world. Their sleep was better not despite their restrictions, but because of them. Even their labor, so often thought of as grueling, was sleep-promoting. Physical exertion during the day, but never overstimulation. Tasks like gardening, woodworking, manuscript copying, each one demanded focus without anxiety. The kind of flow state modern psychologists are obsessed with, and that state carried over into rest. Today, we work in panic and wonder why we can't turn off our brains. Monks worked in peace and slipped into rest as a continuation of the same rhythm. And we can't overlook the role of food. Monastic diets were modest, plant-based, and free of sugar spikes. They didn't gorge before bed. They didn't snack after Compline. Their fasting cycles aligned with their circadian needs. Now, studies show that time-restricted eating and reduced sugar can improve sleep quality. But the monks didn't diet. They simply followed structure. And it worked. There's something deeply subversive in all this. In a culture that tells us to optimize, to maximize, to never stop, monks stopped. Every night. With purpose. They didn't collapse into sleep. They arrived at it, like a destination. And in that stillness, they found not just rest, but renewal. So maybe it's time we rethink our approach. Maybe sleep isn't a passive state to be squeezed in between tasks. Maybe it's an active part of living well. A practice, a discipline, a ritual. Just like the monks believed. They never intended to be sleep pioneers. They weren't chasing wellness trends, they were chasing God. But in that pursuit, they found something universal. Something every human needs, regardless of belief. The peace that comes from knowing when to work, when to pray, and when to simply rest. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we're missing. Not just a better mattress, but a better rhythm. A better story about what sleep is for. Because in the end, the monks weren't just sleeping well, they were living well. And that might be the most revolutionary idea of all. So what have we learned from 1,000 years of silence and slumber behind monastery walls? That better sleep isn't about more gadgets, it's about less noise. It's about intention, rhythm, and remembering that rest is not a luxury. It's a human necessity. Monks didn't just teach us how to pray, they taught us how to pause. And in that pause, they found a kind of peace the modern world keeps chasing. Could you live like that? Just a little? What would happen if you built your life for rest instead of squeezing rest into your life? Would your sleep improve? Or would everything else start to change too? Let us know in the comments how your sleep compares to a medieval monk's. Could you handle a stone cell and a 2 a.m. prayer call? Or are you team memory foam all the way? And if you're into shocking medieval truths, smart storytelling, and history that hits different, subscribe to Medieval Daily and turn on notifications. We're just getting started.